happening now. We'd like to welcome our viewers from across North America and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room, episode 155 for November the 13th, 2019. My name is Wes Fryer. I'm coming to you from Oklahoma City, where I actually haven't said my title lately, I guess, in the shows, but I am the Technology Integration and Innovation Specialist at the Cassidy School, also teaching 5th and 6th grade media and digital literacy this year, just having kicked off the new trimester. Joined, as always, from our friend from the Great White North, almost, the Great White Montana Big Sky Country, Dr. Jason Neiffer. How are you tonight, Dr. Neiffer?
Good evening, Dr. Fryer. I am well, thank you. It is a lovely night here in Missoula. It's going to be, the lows have been in the upper teens and early 20s, and we're supposed to have a 60 degree day on Friday, so who knows what that means. But I will probably not be out enjoying it because I will be in my office as the assistant director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school located on the beautiful University of Montana campus in Missoula, Montana. And big week here in Montana. Actually, some things that I'll be talking about tonight during the podcast. Great information released from the Rural Education Trust about the importance of technology, and in particular, in my neck of the woods, distance learning to rural students that need to access courses beyond what is available in smaller schools in very rural states like Montana. And of course, I'm interested in all technology and what we can do to better make schools better by meaningfully and thoughtfully integrating technology into the classroom. But my guess is we're not just here to hear about me wax about technology. Wes, what is the EdTech Situation Room?
So we will talk about the week's past technology headlines through an educational lens, and we will probably go down a few rabbit holes, and we may even get up on our soapbox and rant a little bit, as we are prone to do at times. But we will hopefully shed some light, not only on current events, but the ways that those current events may be able to impact us in the classroom or the administration office or wherever it might be that we are involved in education. That is our goal. And we want to encourage everybody to check out our show note links. You can find those at edtechsr.com/links, where we have an embedded Google document with generally far more links than we have time to cover in a week's show. We have been using the same Google Doc now for 154 shows, and it's kind of nice. We've got that table of contents there at the top. I think it's like a 60-page document or something crazy if we were to print it. But anyway, it has a lot. And then on the actual website, edtechsr.com, where maybe you have found this, if you are listening to it, you will be able to hopefully access the links that we actually talk about in the show. So there are usually fewer of those than we have on the doc itself. So would you like to pick the first topic, Dr. Neiffer, or would you like to pass that to me tonight? What is your preference?
I think I'll pass that to you. You put in so many great, interesting links tonight. Why don't you start off and we'll see where it goes.
All right. Well, let's start out with one that is really interesting. And I put this under streaming media. So we can talk a little bit about Disney Plus in a minute, but I want to talk about YouTube. This is an article from The Verge on October 11th, and The Verge headlines this: YouTube says it has, quote, no obligation to host anyone's video. And then the subtitle is Other Changes Affect Children's Content. And so the short of it is there's a new terms of service that YouTube is rolling out on December 10th. And they have explicitly said some things that some journalists have pointed out they always have said perhaps, but they're, pointing it out, even more clearly. It is common for companies to update their terms of service. This happens a lot. There's been some fines. So in September, the FTC had a $175 million fine against Google for allegedly violating COPPA, the Children's Online Protection Act. And so the terms of service have an updated section, I'll read this, on parental responsibility. When children use the platform, have more clearly stated age requirements per country. And then there is a notice stating, if you are a minor in your country, you must always have your parent or guardian's permission before using the service. And so there's some other articles I want to reference tonight that talk about screen time. We actually have a parent university session tomorrow night called Let's Talk About Screen Time. So I've been doing some reading and research and preparation for that. But I think the most troubling thing, and this is what I really am not sure about, and this is what people have been tweeting about, is the following. This is a quote from the terms of service. YouTube may terminate your access or your Google account's access to all or part of the service if YouTube believes in its sole discretion that provision of the service to you is no longer commercially viable. And so what some creators have been saying is this is going to, they're fearing, lead to the capricious, let's use that lovely legal term, deletion or termination of people's accounts. We know in terms of the tech correction that we talk about a lot, responding to the proliferation of, hateful and offensive and violent, inappropriate content continues to be a huge issue at scale on YouTube and other social media platforms. So, it appears that YouTube is positioning themselves perhaps to have an even more clear legal position to delete content. I mean, what I certainly hope is that this doesn't mean, if you're not a content creator with tens of thousands of viewers, hey, we're going to shut you down. I think the EdTech Situation Room, may not be living on YouTube if that happens. But I don't see that fear playing out, but it is interesting. And so I think, the rationale for this, much as it is for like why they're cracking down on brand channels for edu domains, right? That's a weird thing that we saw, happen last spring. So, Dr. Neiffer, you have any theories about what Google and YouTube may be about here with the updated terms of service and these changes?
Well, I think part of this is that YouTube is facing increased pressure about channels that it's forcing off of their platform. And I know you had an interaction, was it yesterday or the day before, with another user that said that the number of creators have been pushed off of YouTube is going to force them into a third party or multiple third parties. And yeah. I agreed with your analysis and your answer back on Twitter that there's no evidence at this point that people are going to mass leave platforms for upstarts. And I almost jumped into the fray on that one and decided that the better angels of my nature would keep me off of that argument. But the thing that I kept thinking about is the fact that we've been looking for an alternative for Twitter for 15 years. And I know that there has been a number of attempts to create like alternative Twitter universes that are better for whatever reason. And in fact, we could even look towards Google and their Google Plus experiment, that people are trying to find alternatives to these major platforms and nothing seems to stick, right? And it's true that some platforms come and go, and right now we talked about in a previous episode that major social media platforms are scared of TikTok and what it can do because it is a growing platform as opposed to Instagram, Facebook, even Snapchat, which are pretty much stagnant in their growth. But I don't see a scenario at this point that there's going to be a mass exodus to a single tool for mass access to YouTube to a single tool. And if content exists on a variety of different tools, I think that kind of hurts the YouTube argument for why it's so popular, right? It's because you can get so much content. And I'm talking about the good stuff here, not the stuff that is maybe edging people towards more aggressive political views. I'm talking about the cooking channels and the fact that I've turned into a paying Bon Appetit magazine, paper magazine subscriber because I enjoy the Bon Appetit channel on YouTube so much. I'm talking about that stuff, right? Which I think creates a very compelling argument for the platform. But, as it becomes more controversial, and I think as more and more, alternative outlets for whatever purposes end up on the platform, YouTube is going to probably start taking action, and that's going to create an exodus for some users of the platform. But I don't know where you go that can, amass that in one location. And the other thing too is that what makes YouTube an effective tool for, we've talked about this a number of times in the podcast as part of the so-called tech correction, is the notion that now that we're acknowledging that there are shortfalls is not the right word, but it's complicated to give everyone a platform on whatever platform you're talking about. If let's say it's the alt-right movement decides that they're going to leave and go to another platform, sure, those that already believe in the alt-right would follow creators there. There's no doubt in my mind about that, but I don't know what that means for recruiting new people to those political views, right?
Right.
Because they're on YouTube.
And they're not wanting, that particular group and others are not wanting to simply live in their own cave, in their own echo chamber and listen to themselves. They're wanting to impact and even drive mainstream media conversations. And we've got some articles and links in the show notes tonight talking about that. So I agree. I think the virality of social media, is really a new phenomenon historically. And there's a lot of people that might be classified as sort of tech utopists, or those, who have just been really optimistic and Pollyannish and maybe, overly naive about what it means when you give everyone the tools to publish at will, if we want to use those terms. And so I do think that, this is stuff that's got to be figured out, and probably, this is related to YouTube wanting to position itself better to respond to those kinds of things. This is tough stuff, right? There's really smart people working on this, and they haven't figured it out, because it's hard to determine. Even in the announcement that that Twitter made, we talked about last week, where they're not going to have paid political ads. Well, what does that mean? And how do you determine a paid issue ad, and how are you going to police that at scale? How are you going to do that?
Right, absolutely. And, let's also remember YouTube is the greatest e-learning tool in the history of learning, right? Like think about back to 20 or 30 years ago, well, actually 20 or 30 years ago, 30 or 40 years ago, when VHS tapes became a thing and schools started investing so much in video. Obviously, commercial video was the dominant piece there, but that was supposed to, and in many ways, revolutionize classroom instruction, that we could bring in video that could repeat or play or record nightline and play it the next day for class. Extraordinary step in the future. And as it turns out, YouTube is that times 1,000. And one of the things that and I get, there are good arguments for limiting access to YouTube from a technical standpoint in a district. I know that bandwidth is still not as cheap as it should be, and I wish that providers would provide even more cheaper, more cheap access to the internet, so that districts could have as much pipe as they need, so every student could stream a video if they wish. But the bottom line is that when we block YouTube, or when we limit YouTube, we are taking, tens of thousands of traditional content providers. I'm not talking about the extraordinary proliferation of new content providers. I'm talking about the Library of Congress. I'm talking about the British Museum. I'm talking about the Modern Museum of Art in New York. I'm talking about the Met. I'm talking about the Smithsonian. I'm talking about ABC and PBS, and all of the extraordinary content creators that now have zero barrier to providing their high quality content to mass audiences. And we haven't mentioned the long tail here in a while, and it's starting to become not a dated notion, because it's still very real, but we don't talk about it as much as we used to. But you want to talk about long tail and YouTube, YouTube audiences that have tiny local audiences, but could find 10,000, 15,000, 30,000 people that could subscribe to a channel. There's no scenario where traditional television or videotape or even DVDs can provide a market there. It's an easy one for YouTube. And I think I've mentioned this in the past, but my partner in crime at the Digital Academy, his name is Mike, and his mom has a crafting channel on YouTube and has nearly 30,000 providers. And it's a little more nuanced.
Subscribers?
I'm sorry. What did I say?
Providers.
Wow, yeah, that's a lot of providers for one channel. 30,000 subscribers, and she's a retired nonprofit professional, and the 90% of the videos is an iPhone propped up on her crafting table, and the channel's called Craft With Me, and she has this extraordinary audience of people that really count on her as a friend, right? That it's a regular opportunity to craft with someone else, and she's got great creative ideas and is a very creative producer of content. But those stories are inspiring to me, right? Oh, yeah. And if you take that to the kind of broader learning perspective, there's just so many amazing channels of people who are de facto experts that have zero barrier to entry to provide learning.
Can you please drop the link to her channel in our show notes? And I want to actually maybe even use that tomorrow night at this Parent University session, because our tendency when we say something like, let's talk about screen time, is going to be, let's absolutely dredge up the worst examples of the darkness online, and let's marinate in it together and resolve to throw away our smartphones. So I think it's really good to be reminded of those kind of things, not to be, naive and put our head in the sand and be Pollyanna, but to say, look, this is an extraordinarily powerful platform that can be used for wonderful things. Unfortunately, that means it can also be used for things that are not wonderful. And let's be aware of those.
Right. Absolutely.
So, would you like to talk a little bit about rural education? I think you dropped.
Sure. Yeah. This probably is maybe a larger discussion starter for our audience more than it is for the podcast tonight. But the Rural School and Community Trust released their 2018-2019 Why Rural Matters report, and something that I've become acutely aware of since taking this job. And let me be clear, Montana's a rural state, right? So our largest cities here is just over 100,000. It's not a megatropolis by any stretch of the imagination, but I grew up in Montana's larger towns. I was born in Great Falls, population about 65,000. I spent most of my college years and teaching years in Helena, Montana. It's the state capital. It has about 60,000 folks that live there, and then I'm now in what passes a big city in Montana. I'm in Missoula, which is where one of the two flagship universities are located at in Montana. It's Missoula, Montana, and one of the things I had to figure out pretty quickly on my job is that the vast majority of schools in the state of Montana are tiny. Right, we have about 30 or so high schools that have anywhere from 300-400 folks up to, I think our largest high school has about 1,800 students, but there are hundreds of school districts, and particularly high schools, K-8 schools, elementary schools that are well below 200 people, and many that are below 50 or even 20. And in a state like Montana, where you can drive from one end to the other in 12 hours, that's how long it takes by car to get from one end of the state to the other, it's a struggle here to provide access to all the services to all the students that live in rural Montana, like students in Bozeman or Great Falls or Missoula or Billings or Kalispell get access to. And if you are in a state that has a larger rural population, and let's be honest, even states like Texas have very large rural populations, this report breaks down what access to education looks like. And it's not particular to technology, but there are many references to technology littered throughout the report, especially as it relates to distance learning in creative and interesting ways that we can get good quality teachers into smaller schools that may or may not be able to afford large staffs that can teach unique electives, right? You are sitting in a tiny town in Montana, Eureka or Ekalaka. Those are two sides of the state in Montana. Both of them are small schools, not the smallest, but small schools. Budgets here don't allow folks to hire 3 history teachers if your graduating class is 11. So you may not have access to AP courses or dual credit courses or unique electives without access to new ways of getting teachers and students together by technology. So if you're in a state that whether you think you have a large rural population or issue in providing access or not, I strongly suggest you look at this report. It has a great state-by-state breakdown. Gives you a sense on, how the states compare in regards to rural population. By the way, Montana, one of the most rural states in the nation, right? And it's not just because of population, it's population and size. So we have lots of cities in northeastern Montana. Most of our population is central to west, but we have a lot of small towns in agriculturally dominant communities in eastern Montana that are extremely remote. Whenever you see like a top 10 remote cities list in the United States, usually Alaska towns will be 3 or 4 on that list. And then, as it turns out, Montana towns are also considered very rural in the state. So very interesting report. It's been out for, I think it's 3 or 4 days. I had Monday off from work, and so I spent a good percentage of that day paging through the report, and it's very interesting reading.
So I'll make a couple of connections here. Probably 8 months ago, a while back, my wife and I went to a town hall meeting downtown in Oklahoma City. It may have been further back than that, because this actually was around the time of the teacher walkout in Oklahoma and having legislators talk about that and whether we're going to have pay raises and the implications there. And it was really, really wonderful. There was a state senator and 2 state representatives there. Really wonderful just to hear directly from them stories and some eye-opening things about what happens, in the legislature. But one of the biggest things they talked about that I had not heard that much, politically discussed, is the rural-urban divide.
Yeah.
And so here in Oklahoma, we have a really big divide between our 2 large urban areas, Oklahoma City, where we live, where there's about 1.2 million people in the greater metropolitan area. The Central School District, Oklahoma City Public Schools, pre-desegregation had about 90,000 students. Today, it's about 45,000. It's about half the size. But, like a lot of cities, we are surrounded by a lot of suburbs, some of which are wealthier, and we have a poorer urban core. And so Tulsa is our other large city. And so anyway, that is a huge thing with state politics. And every once in a while, we've got over 500 districts, most of which have less than 200 kids, most of which have a superintendent that's paid over $100,000. That really grinds on people. But, it is a huge thing between the perspectives that folks who are in urban areas versus rural areas have towards different kinds of issues. Certainly school consolidation proposals would be one of them. But the other connection that I want to make in trying to understand this, so this is an important thing that we need, politically to address and understand. It's another way that we're separated and polarized. And gosh, do we ever live in a time where if you're an individual or an organization that wants to see society polarized, I don't think you have lived in a more gleeful day, because there's just so much dissension and polarization that we have around different issues. But there was a New York Times article, and I just dropped this into, into the show notes. And this is an op-ed. It's by Monica Potts, and it was from October the 4th. And this gets into politics here, which we're not a political show. But talking about rural, and you mentioned not being served and the dynamics of, folks in rural areas not having their needs served and feeling like they don't have a voice politically. This was an article written about rural Van Buren County, Arkansas. It's called In the Land of Self-Defeat. But it's the fight over a local library and whether or not they would increase taxes to pay this librarian more and, improve this social service. And what the community ends up deciding is, no way, she doesn't deserve that. We don't need to pay that. And it is not a really optimistic view, at least in rural Arkansas, for this particular author, of the dynamics of where education is and where the sentiments of taxpayers are about education and the need for, education and library services and things like that. So anyway, there's a lot here to unpack. But I definitely know that Oklahoma shares a lot with Montana, not the size of the geography, but certainly having a very dispersed, largely rural population, and then having, some real challenges that are unique to rural education settings in terms of limitations and things, frankly, that technology should try to help bridge. And it seems to me like, from what I know of you and the Montana Digital Academy, and you've been through multiple iterations. I mean, if anybody out there is looking for models to study and people to talk to who have walked down a long road of how do we best serve the needs of rural, very isolated learners, and to include teachers, and how do we do that in such a way that we're not seen just as a threat and somebody who's coming to take money away from existing public schools. I think Montana has great examples to take a look at there. And I think that we need to have dialogue, and so remembering that town hall meeting makes me, realize I think I posted something today about how we need to be reinventing and reinvigorating representative democracy here in the United States. We really are in challenging times, and we need to raise a generation of kids passionate and wanting to support representative democracy, because if people don't care, if people don't vote, if people are disengaged and they're disenfranchised, we've seen this record played before in history, and it doesn't have a pretty ending. And we need to empower people to share their voice, to have their voices heard, their perspectives heard, and to figure out how we can work together to improve things. And I think that there's a lot of challenges that we have to face. So anyway,
Yep.
Brings those thoughts to mind.
Excellent. Well, where to next, sir?
Well, why don't we talk a little bit about AI? I put a couple articles underneath the heading AI and surveillance, and I'll do the second article first. This is from MIT Technology Review on October 30th. DeepMind AI has now outcompeted nearly all human players at Starcraft 2. And I'll actually drop into the links as well a video that I played for my students in our little class meeting Wonderlinks in the last 2 weeks. I didn't know a lot about StarCraft. I am really not a gamer, but part of the almost cultural literacy that we need people to know about when it comes to supercomputers and AI, is the story of Garry Kasparov and when he got beat, years ago playing chess. And then, that was Deep Blue. And then AlphaGo was this computer developed that has been able to beat the world's best Go players, and the ways that in, South Korea and Japan, this is just unthinkable that, the world's best players who have spent their entire lives, playing this game are now being beat by a computer that's making moves that they've never seen before. It's creatively figuring things out and doing things that humans have not ever done before. And it's amazing, the world's best players. It's they're finding it incredible. And so now this next chapter is this game StarCraft. And so there's a statistic in this article about the number of possible moves in a StarCraft game, and it is just, absolutely crazy. It says there's 10 to the 26 power of choices for every move. So for those of us mathematically challenged, I think that's 26 zeros after the 10. That is a huge, huge number. And so the video that I'll also drop in, shows the team bringing in some of the world's best StarCraft players. And this is a fighting game, a game where you control. And one of the things that's incredible about the video is how fast their guys that are playing this are on their computers and their mice and doing this. But, you're going up against a supercomputer, which doesn't just take the moves of human players and the algorithms that humans have coded, but it learns on its own at its own speed. And so anyway, that is a real sign of the times. And I think part of the cultural literacy of kind of how AI is continuing to advance. We're not going to be taken over tomorrow by Skynet. But, AI is real, and it's making remarkable progress. But this next one is a video, and I just want to encourage everybody, put this on your watch list, okay? Thanksgiving holidays are coming, Christmas holidays. This is about a 2-hour special, but this is on Frontline for PBS. It's called In the Age of AI. It took them 2 years to put this thing together. And if you've been a listener of the show for very long, you are going to hear about a lot of issues and things that we have talked about, from Huawei and the ways in which, concerns over surveillance, the Uyghur minority in Western China, the ways in which, we're having a competition between China and the United States with 5G and the rollout of these technologies, and, the concerns over being able to listen in and capture, data and privacy. Wow, this is phenomenal. In fact, if you are teaching any kind of course that relates to artificial intelligence or surveillance and privacy, or we could even just say more broadly, digital citizenship, man, put this on your syllabus. Either have students watch this and then discuss that, or you could have clips that you talk. I just have never seen a better presentation of AI that I think is very balanced. And it's not just trying to portray, the sky is falling and we're all just going to be owned by the machines. Artificial, intelligence in terms of cars and trucking, and the ways that disruption is going to impact employment. Are we going to have a universal basic income? How are we going to deal with literally thousands of folks that have been making a middle income wage? Suddenly it's not going to be everybody. There's still long haul trucking, but a lot of folks who have been doing long haul trucking, I forget how many billions of dollars the whole industry is in trucking, but it's huge, and like a third of that is labor costs. And so automation, machines, delivering packages, there's a whole lot going on. And so I just felt like this is a fantastic deep dive into these issues that really connects a lot of dots, and it would honestly be a great thing to watch together and talk about, because processing these changes and then figuring out what are we going to do politically, right? We've got some political candidates talking about these kind of things, but it hasn't really gone mainstream. And so anyway, I think it's phenomenal. So Jason, are you familiar with Starcraft? And on a scale of 1 to 10, where is your fear level, let's say in the near term, about Skynet and AI, taking over the Neiffer world?
Well, I mean, so I did play a little Starcraft back in the day, so good game. I was not very good at it. In fact, unfortunately for me in game playing world, my skill level kind of topped out around 2005. So it's been a while since I've made any real inroads there. In fact, I tend to play older games when I am engaged in gaming. I think Half-Life 2 is one of the best games ever made, and love it a lot. But the question related to Skynet and fear about that, I don't think I fear it as much. And I do think that we need to continue to have cultural debates about this. And at some point, we are putting our lives in the hands of the machines. And in a lot of ways, we are now, right? The number of people that can't make it around in a new city without GPS, for example, is a good example where we've lost some skill here. In fact, this morning, my wife recently had her 20-year-old Subaru died, and so she needed to purchase a car. So she bought a couple years used Subaru, and she got the kind of perk package that came with it today, and included a weird thing that I haven't seen in a while. One of the services that Subaru provides as part of its perk package is that you can mail this card to them and tell them a trip you're about to take, and they will send you instructions back via a packet. And so it reminded me of, I don't know if you've ever used a triptych, Wes.
Oh yeah.
AAA triptych
was for years.
Was a service where you told them you were going to take a car trip from, let's say, Missoula, Montana to San Diego, California, and it would basically Google Map it for you, but then present with you this map that was strung together and clipped together, and they would highlight where there's construction and point out restaurants and
you could fold it open to get a very clearer view of the cities that you'd be going to.
Absolutely. And what Google Maps does for us today. So I was delighted that I remember what it was, and I can't really remember why I had one, but I did. Got one 25 years ago, pre-MapQuest, right, which is what largely replaced that, and then Google Maps. But the fact that we rely on that technology so much, I think, is something at least to be aware of. But we have to continue to have conversations about this stuff, and when there are decisions made on our behalf to move us more towards the technology making the call based on a logarithmic thinking, or perhaps predetermined choices that you've worked into the AI, it's certainly something we need to be thinking about. But you mentioned truck driving as an example of where AI is going to have such an economic impact. There are a lot of states where truck driving is the number one job, and if you look at number jobs across the United States, there are some states where I think elementary school teacher is the number one job, but in most states, truck driving is the number one job. I don't think we are within a decade of mass losses in that industry driver-wise, because I still think there's a lot of work to do before that becomes a real reality where you will start to see massive job losses. But I don't see truck driving being something that is 15 years from now a primary profession in the majority of states in the United States. And I've talked to friends that are well studied in economics. When I talk about the fear is probably a strong word, but the caution we need to bring to our future economic means through employment, that tell me that we've dealt with industrialization and the increase and decrease of jobs over time, and we'll deal with this as well. But certainly something we need to be acutely aware of. And from an educational standpoint, we need to make sure that we're giving students a lot of different skill sets that are malleable into different careers. It doesn't mean that, if you suddenly lose your job as a truck driver, that you're going to be cross-trained into becoming a nuclear scientist, but there should be other skill sets that we give students that may have no relevance now, that at some point in the future will have relevance as the job market changes, fairly dramatically.
Well, and I feel a little bad even the way I phrased that question, because it's a little silly to ask about Skynet and that kind of fear factor.
Right.
That's probably kind of like what people just go to because we've heard of that. That's a cultural thing of, oh yeah, I know that has to do with AI, but the UBI, the universal basic income, the employment aspects, self-driving trucks as well, pardon me, as well as cars. Those are things that we need to grapple with, and we need to grapple with them practically. It's not just talking about a science fiction Arnold Schwarzenegger movie and, oh, isn't that scary? Like, this is talking about our neighbors. This may be talking about our own family. And this is talking about, big scale changes in society. On a good note, from this documentary, from PBS about AI, in that episode, there's a section from this kid who's now, I think he's 24 years old, but he was all into robotics, and I think first robotics competitively, and just, one summer took a golf cart and a computer and figured out how to basically get it to navigate a course. And now he's got a company that has big contracts with some large companies that's doing, long haul trucking. And man, this rig, has got all of these different cameras, above it. And it does have a driver, but wow, it's I don't know that people recognize how fast this is moving. And these are conversations that we've got to talk about, because we are probably not, I'll just be pessimistic here, which I don't like to be, but we're probably not going to get ahead of this politically. I mean, there's a lot of things we need to address politically. And I don't think our institutions, our institutions don't tend to be very, very agile. And so when it comes to this kind of thing, and the mindsets and things like that of society, hopefully we can have some leaders that can really help us. And that will be good if we can have folks, pointing to this and talking about, let's work on this, let's figure this out proactively. But it's something that I think it may catch up to us far, a lot of people just maybe kind of unaware of how quickly this happens.
Yep.
So
absolutely so.
All right, let's talk a little bit of Apple. Let's see. I think you put in a couple articles as well. There's an article that I had to share because it was one I thought of you, and maybe I shared this last week. I'm an Android user who tried the Apple Watch for a month, and now it's the only smartwatch I'll recommend. So that was Android Police on November the 8th. Any movement there on your Apple Watch front?
No, I'm pretty I'm pretty stuck, I think, where I'm at in regards to that. Although to relay it to another article that I think is interesting is that I don't think we've talked about this article. There's been a lot of hubbub in the last week because Google has a secret health data something. I couldn't get past the first couple paragraphs, and this was on my phone, so I didn't really read that deeply. But I will say that another article that I'm sharing that is related to that, Mac Rumors reported on November 6th that Apple is now kind of revamping how they're advertising their applications. And when you get an Apple phone, an Apple tablet, an Apple desktop, it does come with a number of very functional applications that allow you to do things anywhere from listen to podcasts to edit your own video. And it's a great platform for that, but they're now starting to kind of twist the availability of all the great Apple applications in being very privacy focused. And so I'm not particularly worried about my health privacy from the standpoint that my own accounts are secure, and that I don't think that's going to be used against me at any point, right? And I've been very open here on the podcast that I'm a kidney transplant recipient. I'm obviously very engaged with the health industry, but in a future where insurance starts to use, some of the kind of social data available to try to make insurance decisions, I don't want, the fact that maybe I eat a pizza every once in a while, or travel through Spain, as I will in the month of December, and take advantage of the culinary delights there, to be something that's used against me later, or that I have high blood pressure on work days, or that I'm not walking as much as I should be, or whatever that. And I do think I do not perceive at this point that Google has some mass conspiracy to collect health data to use against me. I do think, however, that if the watch ever becomes important to me, let's say from a heart health standpoint, right, all the amazing things that the Apple Watch is doing for cardiac health, I think I might be more interested in a platform like Apple that is really designing apps around the privacy piece. And so I thought that the juxtaposition of those two articles is pretty interesting.
Reminds me again of the PBS Frontline AI special. It shows an app in China that someone's developed, and they can actually check about 5,000 different data points for someone before deciding in an instant whether or not to make a loan to that person. And there's all kinds of weird things that they have correlations to, like, do you let your cell phone battery get way down to the bottom, or do you kind of keep it, more charged? And I mean, things statistically that are just wild, but the number of data points. So, we were getting a prescription medication for my wife today. And of course, the CVS person's like, what's your phone number? Well, they're on sale. You can get this cheaper. And of course, what you're doing every time you give your phone number, your email, is you're helping them connect the data points to, build this larger cloud of information about yourself. And, China is building right now the case study of what happens when the government and business get together and put all that together and have a social credit score for people and, do a lot of things. And by the way, that is something we need to decide as a society is, do we want to move also towards the China model of surveillance, no privacy, social credit, or do we want to live in a different world?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, a couple screen time ones. I want to do a couple. We've got about 15 minutes left. Social media, Instagram, starting to hide like counts in the U.S. An article from Variety on November 8th. And also from Wired on November 8th, thinking that, this is harming, people's conversations. It's harming the platform. Basically, pardon me, I think the person originating it is going to be able to see likes, but everybody else is not. And so, that may, cause some substantial changes in the way that people are interacting with social media. Pretty interesting. But the biggest screen time article I want to talk about, this is really crazy. I'll do a shout out to one of my new favorite podcasts. It's called No Dumb Questions. And this is an article from the Des Moines Register on September 24th. I had not heard of this situation before. And I'm going to use this tomorrow in our parent university about screen time to unwrap, because there's a lot here. The article is titled, Meet Carson King, the Iowa legend who raised more than $1 million for charity off of a sign asking for beer money. And so what happened here is that, on Saturday mornings for college football, game day travels to these different places. And so this 23, 24-year-old kid had the idea of putting a beer sign up with a Venmo, and people, jumped on it. And then he decided he's going to start donating it to charity and to a local children's hospital. And then Anheuser-Busch gets on board and all these other folks, and they start to match money, and all this stuff has happened. Well, the part that this links to screen time and social media is really at the very bottom of the article. And at the very bottom of the article, they they describe that Carson, when he was about 16 years old, had posted a couple tweets that were racist jokes. They date back to 2012 when King was a 16-year-old high school. I think he's responded to them really well. But one of the things this shows is how we live in what I read in a New York Times article is being called a cancel culture, where there's no forgiveness. There's no opportunity to have made a mistake when you're a young kid. You might just be judged by whatever you happened to post when you were 16. Anheuser-Busch is now having nothing to do with him. They're gonna honor their prior agreements, but there's no further moving forward with him. And it's just like, you sinned with 2 tweets when you were 16, so we're gonna brand you with a tattoo, forever racist. You're canceled. It's just incredibly harsh. And so I think there's a lot to unpack with this. We live in a culture where virality can happen. And in this case, it all seemed to be positive. And I think this young man has handled himself as well as he possibly could in terms of deleting these tweets and apologizing and saying that doesn't represent who he is today, et cetera. But it's also, why do the mainstream media journalists have to publish that about him? Why did they do that? And I'm a big fan of the Fourth Estate and journalism, and I think that we have hopefully one of the best and freest journalism cultures here in the United States. But I think it's unfortunate that things like that, we ought to talk about that, because if you're young and stupid, as many of us have been, and maybe still are, and you're going to put some stuff like that on the social media, goodness gracious, you could pay the price for it. And some people will conclude, well, that's why I'm not giving my kid a smartphone while they're under my roof, until they're 18. And I honestly don't think that's the solution either. I think we're going to have to help kids navigate this world and have some freedom and have some abilities to make choices, because it is very potentially perilous. There's also, lots of benefits to using the technology and the tools. But had you heard of that story before? Were you familiar with that, or is that new to you as it was to me, Jason?
The beer sign story?
Yeah.
I'd heard that one as it played out, and I hadn't heard the part about the social media post, however, and going back in that. And one of the things that I immediately think of when I hear you talk about that is that thank goodness that there was no social media when I was in high school and college, right? I was a goony dude. I did dumb stuff, and I embarrassed by some of the stuff that is thankfully becoming hazy in my memory as I get older. But, I did dumb stuff. I did stupid stunts and dumb things and petty crimes and all sorts of dumb things that I did in both high school and college. And living under that microscope, which is what social media provides for everyone, whether they want it or not, you engage in that, you get scrutinized. And I think that's something that we need to be acutely aware of. And, that's part of the reason why that I dislike all the hand-wringing about both millennials and whatever we're calling the generation after millennials. The name seems to change every other week. But, living your younger life under the extraordinary scrutiny of social media, where everything becomes a story, right? Everything is in the news because we are all part of that. I'm glad to hear that he dealt with that in a deft way. I thought the fact that he, literally could have $1 million if he wanted to. People donated that to him to buy beer, and yet he ended up using it for good purposes in his community, I think is an extraordinary thing, and an act that a lot of 20-somethings wouldn't have thought to do. But that I think it just highlights, the difficulty of adolescence and young adulthood in a world where everything is seemingly available online. And I also understand why in a lot of cases that kids have moved more towards the social media platforms that don't have a record to them, that aren't tracking things over time. I do wish I had more pictures of my friends in college. I do wish I had some memory inspiring media right from college.
Perhaps.
Yeah. But I have a box of random crap that some photos, some not, and the photos aren't in super great shape, and that's it. But at the same time, I also, all of my screw ups didn't end up, being aggressively posted either. So I think we need to have a lot of empathy for the fact that childhood and adolescence and college days are different than when we experience that. And if you're a classroom teacher, like, I think it's easy to bemoan a lot of the things the kids do because it's just so different than our experience. But remember, we were never challenged by having YouTube in high school, right? And yes, of course, YouTube is an amazing educational tool, and I will fight for it until it's no longer relevant in that way. But man, you can get lost in YouTube pretty easily. And, YouTube is way more interesting than learning about even really interesting stuff in history.
Let me share a couple more related articles about YouTube and screen time, and then maybe you can pick up a couple Chrome articles, I think, that you would put in. So again, preparing for this Parent University session tomorrow, Bonnie Christian in The Week on November 11th posted, "YouTube is my parenting nightmare," and talking about the incredibly powerful, addictive side of videos, especially for young children, and how difficult that is to navigate. She references an article, which Pocket tells me it's going to take me 23 minutes to read. I've probably read about a fourth of it so far. This is an older article from September 27th, or from September 2017 by James Brindle, but it's called "Something is Wrong on the Internet." And this is talking about a variety of different issues involved with YouTube and the content there and the ways that people are gaming that. And also, I mean, we've talked about this in terms of the algorithms, creating content and grabbing things, and just it is such a wild west. And I tweeted just earlier this evening, I mean, one of the things we used to do with television, like with PBS, is we would trust it, right? I say we, my parents, grandparents, like the older folks would trust, okay, you're watching PBS, it's going to be, produced by these folks that are subject to regulation. There's not going to be profanity on that. It's going to be okay. We're really in a wild west with respect to, YouTube and publishing, in the way that, maybe the kids do like Peppa Pig videos, but oh my gosh, there's tons of folks that are out there putting, Peppa Pig videos out, and you're going to potentially be able to see, all kinds of things that a Peppa Pig character is going to say and do. So I think those are worth checking out. What about some of your Google articles? I think you've got some news on end of life, and I want to do this Phil Schiller. Phil's taking some shots at Chrome. So what do you think about that?
So these are all. Let me do the Chromebook ones first, and then a couple other interesting notes from the Google world. First and foremost, we've talked about this in the past, actually several times in the past, that one of the challenges of purchasing a Chromebooks is you need to be acutely aware that at some point Google stops supporting those, right? And one of the things that is true, you are generally buying low-end hardware when you buy Chromebooks, and at the end of life, it's 6.5 years right now, and in some cases they extend it beyond that, as Google's been trying to push the value of Chromebooks into schools. But you have to go look it up on a weird page that's not necessarily easy to find, and unless you know what you're looking for, you don't know when your Chromebook is no longer receiving updates. Well, Google's taking a very smart action, and they're going to build that into the interface of your Chromebook, so you can go into the settings and find out when the end of life is for your Chromebook. And we've talked about the end of life a lot in the past, but I like that notion of empowering users and letting them know when the end of life of a Chromebook is. But interestingly, that's the good news from Google World this week. 9 to 5 Google report today that Apple's Phil Schiller talks about, and I got to bring up the exact quotation here because he takes very aggressive shots at Google. He says that basically he understands why people buy Chromebooks, or why schools buy Chromebooks, because they're so cheap. But he talks about kids who really are into learning and want to learn will have better success. It's not hard to understand why kids aren't engaged in a classroom without applying technology in a way that inspires them. I have a little bit of a disagreement with that, but you need to have these cutting edge learning tools to help kids really achieve their best results. Yet Chromebooks don't do that. Chromebooks have gotten to the classroom because, frankly, they're cheap testing tools for required testing. If all you want to do is test kids, well, maybe a cheap notebook will do that for you, but they're not going to succeed. Holy dog, do I disagree with that notion. First, I want to be super clear that you do not need to purchase premium Apple products to have good pedagogy in the classroom utilizing technology. And in fact, one of the things I've always been a firm believer of is that even not perfect technology can provide an interesting avenue for engagement in a classroom if properly applied, right? But the other piece of that is that I feel like I'm somewhat living proof because I am 100% Chrome OS guy. I have a Chrome desktop at work. I have a Chromebook in my backpack. I utilize that in a docking station at home. That is not true. You can be perfectly productive, learn, create, connect with a Chromebook. And I like Apple stuff. I don't like it as much as I used to because I feel like they've lost their way a little bit in regards to the sizzle that they used to be able to dominate the market with. But man, do I disagree with that notion. And I've seen so many classroom teachers take Chromebooks. And I'm not even just talking about with the Google Suite, which is great. I've seen people take Chromebooks and engage in the Microsoft Office 365 suite with awesome results. I've seen people take Chromebooks and access iWork on the web and do amazing things with it. And it's gross. And I don't think you don't get a market by cutting down your competitors in that way.
There you have it, folks. The official response. Dr. Neiffer has spoken. Phil Schiller, he's taking some shots himself. Okay, so there's a couple security articles, and maybe we'll mention these disinformation ones. I apologize for my cough tonight. This one under security is from NIST, which is the organization that basically comes up with password policies for everybody, I think, among other things, from October the 4th. Security fatigue can cause computer users to feel hopeless and act recklessly. New study suggests. We can probably relate to this, right? I mean, even using a password manager, it's hard. It's challenging. I had it happen today, resetting a password for something. I was like, are you kidding? And I just, but here's a study showing how we're fatigued, how we use, easy to remember passwords, we repeat the same passwords. Yes, this is probably something that we're all living. Business Insider reminds us on November 11th, do not use your Google password for other apps. It talks about two-step verification and how that's very good. But, we need to be using unique and complex long passwords on every website, and you shouldn't be repeating that. And then I'm going to skip up to the disinformation title. And man, we could do a whole show on this. We're about at the top of the hour, but I just want to mention a couple of these because these are so good. NPR yesterday, how internet trolls and online extremists are hijacking American politics. And this is a fantastic interview. In fact, my Geek of the Week, I probably shouldn't, I don't know, should I do Geeks of the Week that I haven't read yet? This is the article, or the host here is Andrew Marantz, and he spent 3 years reporting on the alt-right's use of social media. And if you'd like some insight into the ways the alt-right specifically has been utilizing, vast bands and hordes of a lot of times teens and just young people, but basically folks who want to troll others, and they have created their own articles and information, made hashtags trend, got mainstream media to pay attention to it, and they have hijacked the minds of thousands and thousands of people. And this was bad in 2016. And Marantz, who studied this the last 3 years, said, we ain't seen nothing yet. Get ready, baby, for 2020. It's going to be horrific. So this is a great interview on NPR Fresh Air. It's an audio podcast you can listen to. And on the same topic, First Draft has an article called Information Disorder. The techniques we saw in 2016 have evolved. This is an October 2019 special report. I like this terminology, saying we live in an age of information disorder. And, words matter. And for that reason, when journalists use fake news in their reporting, they're giving legitimacy to an unhelpful and increasingly dangerous phrase. And so they talk about misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. There's a really nice Venn diagram here talking about falseness and intention to harm. I mean, this is when I get into this stuff with media literacy and I'm thinking about English, like, okay, my daughter just did a big study on Beowulf, and that's really, great. And there's some great critical thinking that's going on there. And I'm not just dogging English teachers, and maybe I'll be, strung up at work when I go back mentioning this. I mean, there's great stuff that's happening critical thinking wise there. But now we're reading Macbeth, and I'm thinking, why are we not studying this? Because this kind of the weaponization of social media, disinformation campaigns, the way that politics and conversation nationwide is being driven by this stuff. I just don't think it's being discussed and studied the way that it should be. And so the last one is a PBS Frontline from November 7th, how Saudi Arabia weaponized Twitter to target MBS critics. And if you're not familiar with MBS, then you need to do a little research on Saudi Arabia, because, he is the king of Saudi, the crown prince, the heir apparent of Saudi Arabia, who ordered the assassination and dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi, and utilized social media in ways that helped basically him do that. So that is not good news. That is pretty negative, but it's stuff we got to talk about, and we got to help kids. We need to help inspire students to solve this stuff, right? Smart minds need to be, they are tackling this, but we need even more folks to help us tackle and solve all this. So thankfully, I think, Jason, you have solved disinformation for the 2020 campaign. Your solution is what?
Oh, well, put me on the spot. Well, what I would give a shout out is that I would defend the humanities as being as important, but what I think we need to do is I think we empower the professionals that are already doing a lot of this work, and that's the school librarian. I don't think that they're, in a lot of cases, that they have enough resources or enough access to students to help push these conversations. I know when I was a classroom teacher that the school librarians in my building were really critical, particularly when I taught government and social studies classes, in helping me provide another voice of not just in some of the old school stuff like source citation and the importance of acknowledging others' work, but because the library is no longer a physical building, it is a large global manifestation, that we need to take even more proactive steps to evaluate information. And a lot of the stuff that on the early days of the internet, it was kind of a boring way to look at the internet, like what is the difference between this website and that website, and the internet bad and print sources good, and the kind of stuff, the lines we were drawing very early on in the internet. Well, the lines are absolutely blurred, right? Like there is no longer a distinction between the print world and the internet world. They're both considered both viable quality sources, and in other cases, pieces of propaganda. And so I think re-engaging, if your building is not doing so, your library staff, and helping proceed with those conversations in your classroom, I think that's an absolute critical piece.
All right. Well, I've taken us over the top of the hour, trying to get in even more articles, but hey, how about Geek of the Week? Would you like to share one with us tonight?
Sure. Favorite site that I'm really surprised neither of us have shared before, because I know we both use it. The Noun Project is an extraordinary website that provides, I think it's over 2 million icons. And icons are little flat designed caricatures of something. And I love them because they are great in presentations, and they're great with providing good quality, clean graphic design in both print and web-based documents. And icon sets are sometimes hard to find. There are 1,000 free versions available on the internet. What I like about the Noun Project is that you can search, and I like it so much I actually pay for the pro version of this. And a little hint, if you have the pro version and you threaten to leave, they will drop the price. So that's something that I do, and it's something I would pay for. The maximum pro price is a great service. You can use any of the icons on the website for free if you cite them. It's an open source project, but you don't have to cite them if you purchase the pro account, and it plugs right into PowerPoint and Google Slides.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I have three. I'll go fast. One of them is going to be on my reading list for the holiday. This is Andrew Morance's book. He researched for 4 years. It's called Antisocial: Online Extremists, Techno-Utopians, and the Hijacking of the American Conversation. Absolutely fantastic. He's the guy interviewed in that NPR segment from yesterday on Fresh Air that I was telling you about. Second of all, also from First Draft News, but this is more of a toolkit. This is called Information Disorder, the Definitional Toolbox. And so this is also from Claire Wardle. So shout out to Claire. Definitions matter. These tools will give you the words you need to talk about information disorder. Just fantastic. And then lastly, on a little bit of a different note, from Robot and AI's Twitter on November 7th, MIT's mini cheetahs. I don't know if you saw these, Jason, but this is a, herd of about 15 headless miniature robots that look like little dogs, and they are moving in concert. And I guess if we want to creep people out, let's take a look at these and, consider each one of these having an automatic weapon attached to them or some kind of explosive. And yes, we could probably get them concerned. So we are 4 minutes beyond the top of the hour. Dr. Neiffer, when you're not here on Wednesday nights, where can people find you and learn with you?
Find me on Twitter at TechSavvyTeach. I also work with the Northwest Council for Computer Education, www.ncc.org. And I'll give a shout out to the Virtual Learning Leadership Alliance, the 14-state virtual school alliance that works on issues like we talked about earlier tonight with rural education and access. How about you, sir?
Awesome. Well, when I'm not coughing, I am blogging at speedofcreativity.org. My Twitter is wfryer, and my media and digital literacy website for the year is mdtech.cassidy.org. We want to encourage everybody to check out our show notes at edtechsr.com/links. We want to thank you for tuning in. Please give us a shout out. If you find anything useful and helpful, let us know. You can reach out to Jason and I on Twitter. You can use the hashtag edtechsr. And as always, we encourage you to stay savvy and stay safe. Until next week.
Good night.